Hello everyone and welcome to the Dragon Code. In this video series I'm going to teach you .NET and Flutter by building To-Do app, and in this first video I will start with backend of app. In this project I'm going to use following technologies: ASP.NET Core Web API for backend, Flutter for frontend, and SQL Database. This is project architecture on this picture, so mobile app calls backend web API and backend communicates with SQL database. In this diagram on the left you can see architecture of backend. It is multi-layer architecture, so there's API layer, business logic layer, data access layer, and database layer. On the right side you can see name of projects for each layer. API for API, application for business logic, infrastructure for data access layer, and core for database layer. Here are those projects in Visual Studio: API, application, infrastructure, and core. Before proceeding to app, you should understand data transfer objects or DTOs. We will work with DTOs on API and business logic layer, and with entities only in data access layer and database layer. So in case you have entity user and it has property password, when you want to display all users in table, you should not retrieve password because it is dangerous, so you will create DTO without password. You can create many DTOs for same entity for different purposes. There are two types of DTOs: plain DTO for get methods and upsert DTO for put and pos method. It is short from update and insert DTO. So you can see here in app I have entity and I also have DTO for to-do item and upsert DTO for to-do item. First step is to create database. In database there will be tables which are entities in C#. I added entities in entities folder in core project. I added to-do item entity which will have attributes title, description, due date, and is done. For now there's only one entity to-do item, but later all other entities will inherit this base entity. It is abstract class, because we don't need instance of base entity. But these properties ID is deleted, created at, and modified at will repeat in each entity, so it is better to put them all in one abstract class, which will be inherited by all entities. Next, you need class which inherits DB context. In this project, it is in infrastructure, in this file, database context. Here you can see to-do items entity. As you can see, this is partial class. Partial class means that you can have same class in different files. When class in complex, it is good to separate its parts in different files. So I put configuration and seed in different files, but they belong to same class, database context. In database seed, I added two to-do items which we inserted in to-do items table when database is created. In configuration file, I overrode save changes and save changes async methods to set modify date to now date if it is update of entity, and if it's insert to set created at to now date. I will also apply configurations of all entities, and they are all type of base configuration. They inherit base configuration. Those configurations are located in infrastructure project in configuration folder. So this is configuration for to-do item entity. So property title is required. It has maximum length of 40 characters. Description is not required, and so on. And all entity configurations will inherit base configuration. And this is configuration for base entity. So ID is primary key, is deleted is required, modified at is not required because it is null when entity is created. And in case of soft delete, we will only retrieve entity if is deleted is false. I will explain soft delete later. You should also install following NuGet packages for each project. This is for infrastructure. This is for application, automapper and fluent validator. And this is for API. This project is on my GitHub. I put link down below in the description so you can always check code. Next layer is data access layer. In data access layer, we will work with repositories. Repositories perform CRUD operations on database. C stands for create, R for read, U for update, and D for delete. In this app, there's also project infrastructure interfaces, which is used to separate interfaces from implementation. Interface defines contract for each class that implements that interface must provide implementation for its methods and properties. It is good practice to always have interfaces because in that case different classes can implement those interfaces and have different implementations of interface methods. So there is iBase repository and it will be inherited by all other interfaces. Let's go back in iBase repository. So here you can see a list of methods that each class that implements this interface must implement. So there's get by ID to get single entity, get page async to get a list of entities, add and aid range for inserting entities, update and update range for updating, remove and remove by ID async for removing, and this just returns number of entities which is used in reports, but for now you should only focus on these. And let's now move in implementation. Implementation is in infrastructure, project in repositories folder, and it is base repository. Here you can see protected properties, database context, and dbset. Dbset is extracted set from database context, so it is easier to use. Without dbset, you will always have to write database context dot that entity. Now you can just use dbset. In getById async method, you pass ID parameter and find that element with that ID and return it. Next method is getPageAsync, which return a list of elements, a list of entities, and performs pagination on it. It takes search object as parameter. So what is search object? Search object is used to put all filter parameters in one class, in one object. Without it, we can have 5 or more parameters in function and it is not readable, so better approach is to put all them in one class, in search object. Because this is base implementation, we have base search object. It is here in infrastructure interfaces folder, project, So there is base search object which has properties page number and page size. And that base search object will be inherited by all other search objects. This is search object for to do item. It has title and is done properties. So we can filter by its title and we can choose to only retrieve done tasks or that are not done. Let's go back in repository method. So this method will call to page list async method and retrieve result from it. So let's go here. So to page list async is extension method for iQueryable objects, in this case dbSet. So it will perform filtering on dbSet based on page number and page size. Page number is page number just like in book. There page 1, page 2, page 3. And page size defines how many elements will be on each page. So for example, there are 100 elements in total and page size is 10, so there will be 10 pages of 10 elements on each. So items are filtered. Then page list object is created. Let's go in there. So it is generic object for pagination result. There are informational properties here, page number, page size, which I mentioned, how many pages there are, what is total count of elements, and so on. And at the end, there's a list of items, a list of elements on that page. So all properties of page list object are assigned and then that object is returned. So this is base implementation of getPageAsync method, and because it is virtual, it can be overridden in inherited class. So let's go to do items repository. It implements to do items repository and inherits base repository. So here we pass to do item search object. Let's go again here so I can filter by title and is done status. So we will get elements where is done. So if it is nullable, if is done is nullable, we will get all elements, and if it isn't, if it is true or false, we will only retrieve done or undone tasks. And second filter is title. If title is null, we will retrieve all elements, and if it's not, we will retrieve all elements which contains that part of title filter. And we will return page result. So let's test how is it working. I will put breakpoint here. This is that endpoint. I will call it. And here you can see in search object, by default done is null, title is also null, and default values of page number and page size is 1 and 10. So I will get these results. I have 4 elements in total, but because page size is 10, I will get all in one page. I can change default values, so I will put 2 second page and page size is going to be also 2. So I will go on second page and there will be 2 elements. I can also go to first page and there are first 2 elements. I can change page size, for example, to 3 and there will be 3 elements on first page and only 1 element on second page because overall count of elements is 4. Let's move back on default. Now let's filter by its done status, so I will only retrieve those elements who are all tasks who are done. So this is only done task, wash dishes, and there are 3 undone tasks. You can see total count is 3. And I can also filter by title. So this, and I'll only get this task. Let's move back on all. Buying milk, so I will type buy, and I only get buying milk task. Let's move back on other methods. Let's go in base repository. Next method is add async, which just add element. So here entity is passed and it is just add in dataset. Add range is similar, just add list of elements, range of elements, so it will take IEnumerable list of entities. And it will call add range async method of dbSet. Next method is update for modifying entity. And there's no async method for updating, so we will use sync method. Also for update range, just in this case we are updating list of entities. Removing, we just pass entity and call method remove and it will delete element. Next method is remove by ID async, so we pass ID and in case of hard delete we execute delete by ID, so we remove this element from database. But in soft delete we do different. Soft delete is not actually delete, we just assign true value to isDeleted attribute of element. This is what I mentioned before in database configuration. With soft delete you don't actually delete, you just hide deleted elements by setting isDeleted property to true. And let's go in configuration. It is actually here in base configuration, so if it is soft delete we don't show deleted entities where isDeleted property is true. Base repository. And the last thing about data access layer I'm going to mention is unit of work pattern. It ensures that either all operations are done or executed or none of them. Changing in one repository can affect other repositories. For example, if you modify user and user has profile photo and photo is different table, by changing profile photo of user you also affecting photo repository. So unit of work ensures that changes in all tables will be executed or none of them. So here in unit of work we will have all repositories. For now it is only one, but later when we will have more repositories we will put them all here. And because unit of work acts like transaction, so there are begin transaction, commit transaction, and rollback in case one operation can't be done, so we roll back all other operations. Because database context class is infrastructure project, you are going to add migrations here. I already done it to create database. So here you will write add dash migration, and you can call it whatever you want. Initial, I will call it initial. I already done it. This is migration. And after you add migration, you just execute another command, update database. You also need to provide connection string, but we will cover it later. For now, I will show you database. So here I will select all elements from to-do items. Execute, and here you can see first two are from seed and second two I added through Swagger. Now we will move to business logic layer, but before that I need to mention to also add project dependencies, references. So you can see here infrastructure interfaces. Project has to do core reference. Infrastructure has infrastructure interfaces reference, and you can also check here. So this is references of each project. Just like in infrastructure project, we also have here in application one project for interfaces and one for implementation. So here we have base service interface. It takes primary key, DTO, upsert DTO, and search object. As I said in the beginning of this tutorial, in application layer we will work with DTOs, not with entities. So those are definitions of method that classes that implements this base service interface must implement. They are all same like in repository, but as I said, now they work with DTO objects. Let's go in implementation. So it is base service. So this is constructor of base service. Here we get current repository from unit of work with reflection. We get type fields and find field of that repository. So let's go again in unit of work. So we will find this field in case when it is to do items repository. We will also work here with mapping and validation. And let's start with methods. So first is get by ID async. It will get single element. So here it will call current repository and call this method from repository. When it is retrieved, it will map this entity to DTO. Mapping is done with automapper NuGet package, this package. So for that we need to create profile class. This is base profile and it is inherited by all other profiles for each entity. So with to do item we defined mapping. So automapper will automatically map entities with same name. So in this case we are mapping to do item, which is entity, to do item DTO. So it will just find properties with same names and it will map it. So we want both reverse map with to do item DTO and to do item. This is for get methods for just retrieving data, but for inserting and updating entities. We only want to do item upser DTO be mapped to do item, not opposite. So let's go back there. Let's actually go to controller. I will cover controllers later in API layer section, but let's just now go here. This is this method get. I will run this program and call this method. And you can see in controller I'm calling service. I'm passing ID. And here I first get entity in repository. So I retrieve entity. It is now entity, but I don't want to retrieve entity. I will retrieve DTO. So I'm mapping entity to DTO. And then I'm returning DTO. It is DTO, not entity. And I will return it. As result in endpoint, you can see this is DTO, not entity. Let's go back in base service. Next method is getPageAsync, so it will go to repository and return page list object but with entities. And then I need to map it to page list of DTOs. I also need to create mapping profile for page list. So it will find two page. It will map from one page list to another page list object, like this type of page list. Next method is add async. So here parameter is upser DTO for DTO for updating or inserting entity, and here validation is used. We need to validate the DTO so the right values are passed to entity. Validate async method is used, but I also need to provide validator for upsert DTO to do item upsert DTO, so title cannot be empty and is done cannot be null, and due date also cannot be null. Description can be null, so I won't do anything with description here, and I will also provide error codes when it's not null, not empty. So again, I'm doing this for this upsert DTO to do item upsert DTO. And let's go in validate async. So I'm passing upsert DTO and I'm calling validate async method from validator. It is method from NuGet package fluent validator, and if it's not valid, it will provide validation error. Next is add range async, so it will just validate range of elements. But let's also see how this working for single element. I'll run this code. So this is post. If I pass if title is null, which cannot be, I will get validation error, the title field is required. And when everything is okay, by soap, description is null, it can be, and it is not done, false. We can see it validates, upsert.dto is valid. We then map it upsert.dto to entity and set that entity and async method inside repository, which add it in db set, and we need to save changes, and we will return DTO, plain DTO, to show what we have added. So here you can see this is DTO, result of insert operation. As I said, add range async is same, just works with list of elements. Update async similar, just updating, and also need to validate upsert DTO. Update range, updating range of elements. Remove, it doesn't have to provide any result, just remove element. Remove by ID, execute method from repository. This is validate async method that I covered, and this is validate range async, which calls this validate async method for each upsert DTO. I will shut down app, and because I forgot to mention that in infrastructure project, because we will all use that in all these services, I will use all them in API project, which is base project that is run. I need to add them to registry. So add application. Here there will be all services, and add validators. Here will be all validators. So in API project, I will just call this method extension method instead of adding all services one by one, and it is also done here in infrastructure project. So with this, I will put interface as variable, and it will enable to pass any class that implements this interface. And the last layer is API layer, which is basically gateway which front-end app will use. So here we have base controller, which inherits controller base, and that class have all what controller needs. Then we have base CRUD controller, which inherits base controller I mentioned before. And here we have all base CRUD operations: get paged, post, put, and delete. And because API is main project, we need to put all services, repositories, and everything from other projects in this project. So here I'll create builder and add controllers, and then we need to add connection string of database. Connection string is here in app settings JSON in development. So this is connection string, its name is main. So what I'm doing here, I'm using this bind config extension method for web application web builder, and I'm passing key here. And let's see how this works. I'll run this project. I will go in program here and run. So here I want to get connection string, so I will go in app setting JSON, and I want this part with this key connection string. So I'm passing it here, and let's go inside this function. So key is connection string, it is not shown. Now you can see connection string, and I get that section and retrieve it. So now I have connection string, and this is main. I also use this class connection string to put that in object rather than having plain string variable. Then I'm adding mapping rules like this in service collection, validators. This is from application project. Also add application from application project. I'm adding services. Repositories from infrastructure. I'm adding database with connection string. So adding add DB context, use SQL Server with config class, which with property string property main, which is connection string. Then I'm adding course to be able to use every method and any header. And it is basically it. As I said, I only have one entity, so this this to-do item controller will inherit base CRUD controller with all base CRUD operations, and additionally I have this change done status. So this method change is done status. So when it is done, it changes to undone, and when it is undone, it changes to done status. It just reverse value, and it is done. It's also implemented in service in application layer. So it get that task and it just reverse its value. And for the end, let's just perform all those base CRUD operations. So I will add one task, finish homework. Description is null. Due date isn't important now, it will be false. I will skip these breakpoints, so I successfully added it. Let's execute. This is finish homework. Now let's modify it. I'll copy this here, but for now I also need to provide ID. ID is 18, so ID is, I didn't copy this, so let's copy this, and ID is 18. Finish homework modified, and let's execute this so we can see it is updated, and we also have modified at. Now let's execute this again, and here we can see modified at date, and it is changed. Now I will call get method. Get by ID, it is 18. Remove breakpoint. It is this entity. Now I will change its done status. I just need to provide ID. So before it is false, is done is false. Now it is true. Also in database it is 1, true, and now I will delete it. So 18, it is deleted, and there's no longer that task here. This is all for this video. If you have some questions and want something to explain better, please write down in comment and I will cover it in next video. In next video I will cover Flutter app, front end of this app. As I mentioned before, this project is on my GitHub and this part is on adding Flutter project branch. So check that branch for this video. If you like this video and want more videos like this, press like button and subscribe, and see you next time.